When Frank Fritz passed away, what was inside his private estate was more than just a collection. It was a revelation, and what they discovered inside left even his closest friends stunned. On the day the estate was finally opened, there was an eerie feeling. Frank Fritz was always a man of mystery, a collector, a seeker, and a man whose passion for picking turned forgotten relics into hidden gems. A man who had dedicated his life to pursuing history had now become a part of it, his belongings unaltered, and there was stillness in the air. Nobody was ready for what they were going to find inside his garage, but frozen in time served as a chilling reminder of the life he had created. Several of the old motorcycles, their chrome faded by years of dust, sat like forgotten warriors in the shadows, while others gleamed as though they had just been polished, seemingly waiting for their owner to come back, start the engine, and ride out into the sunset. In addition to purchasing bikes, Frank spent decades preserving, restoring, and honoring this collection. Every one of them had a backstory and a soul, but that was only the beginning. Next to the motorcycles were antiques that had never been seen before. Collectibles were so uncommon that even experienced pickers would kill to have them. Rare vintage toys and old Americano antiquities, as well as limited edition gas station signs from the early 1000s and 900s, possessed more history than some museums. It was a kingdom of forgotten treasures. Every component a new chapter in Frank's life was whispered, but among the artifacts, there was something else that no one had expected because the real shock wasn't what was discovered, but rather who was supposed to inherit it. As legal documents emerged, questions started to circulate, and there was no clear heir to his empire and no last-minute will left. The future of his life's work was now uncertain, and while people speculated about who might inherit his enormous collection, the truth grew even more hazy as rumors started to circulate. Before we can completely comprehend the significance of this discovery, we must go back to the beginning and the tale of a small town. Some claimed that his valuable belongings would be sold off piece by piece all over the world, while others hinted that his estate had planned something completely different, an act that would forever redefine Frank's legacy. Since most children spend their youth pursuing ambitions of becoming astronauts, athletes, or movie stars, but not Frank Fritz, we must first understand the guy himself in order to comprehend what he left behind. As a child, Frank saw value where others saw junk, even though they were just old coins, rusted beer cans, or discarded stamps. While others played with toys, he was chasing something else, something forgotten, something lost to the world. He was born in Davenport, Iowa, on October 11th, 1963. From the beginning, Frank stood out because he was fascinated by items that had a backstory and had once held significance for someone. Where most people saw trash, he saw a hidden legacy that was just waiting to be discovered. He wasn't just collecting, he was preserving it. He began by searching garage sales for rare finds at flea markets and searching through dusty corners of old barns. Coins, stamps, old toys, beer cans, or anything else that contained a little of history. Childhood passions don't always lead to jobs. But his enthusiasm was more than simply possession. It was also about knowing where it was kept, what stories it could tell, and how it was windows into a different era. Dreams tend to take a different turn when reality takes over because he grew for almost 25 years. Frank worked as a fire inspector in Iowa, walking into buildings to make sure they were safe rather than to collect artifacts. It was a serious job that required discipline and precision attention to detail, but even as he enforced building codes and checked safety regulations, his passion only grew because he came across history every day: old warehouses, firehouses, abandoned buildings, places full of long-forgotten relics. And he couldn't resist collecting firehouse memorabilia, helmets, extinguishers, and antique alarms. What had begun as a childhood obsession had evolved into a more subdued but unwavering desire to unearth and preserve the past. Then, the realization that this was no longer merely a hobby but rather a business came, and Frank jumped with joy as he opened his shop. The things he collected weren't just sentimental mementos. They had genuine value that people wanted and were willing to pay for. Some partnerships are born out of strategy, while others are born out of necessity. However, Frank Fritz and Mike Wolf's partnership was born out of pure passion. Two Iowan kids united by an obsession, and most people didn't understand the thrill of the hunt, while their classmates were chasing the newest trends. Frank's finds a small and antique store filled with hand-picked relics, unique trinkets, and historical oddities. He had turned passion into profit, but even then, he didn't realize that he was on the edge of something much bigger because this wasn't just about selling antiques. It was about storytelling, and soon the world would be watching. Frank and Mike were chasing history, searching through old garages, dusty barns, and forgotten estates for treasures long abandoned. Their friendship was built on that shared love for collecting, but their paths weren't always intertwined. Frank was content with his antique shop, quietly building his business, while Mike had a vision, one that went far beyond local markets and garage sales. He wanted to turn picking into a movement to show the world that history wasn't just locked away in museums, it was hidden in the attics and basement of everyday Americans, and he had a plan to bring that vision to life. At first, Frank wasn't convinced he was a collector, not a performer. He wasn't looking for fame or a camera crew, but Mikey saw something bigger. He started filming his hunts, pitching the idea to television networks, knocking on every door, until finally one opened. The History Channel took a chance on the idea, and suddenly two small-town pickers were about to take their love for antiques to an audience unlike anything they had ever imagined. In 2010, American Pickers premiered, and just like that, Frank and Mike became household names. Mike was the dreamer, the big-picture thinker, and the quick-talking deal-maker. The formula was straightforward but electrifying. Two best friends traveling across America, searching through hidden treasure troves, negotiating deals with eccentric collectors, and uncovering relics that had been forgotten for generations. The magic wasn't just in the items they found, though. Every week, viewers were captivated by the thrill of the hunt, the unpredictable nature of each pick, and the dynamic between two seemingly inseparable guys. Frank was the heart of the show. He could walk into any room, crack a joke, and transform a cold negotiation into a warm conversation. Where Mike focused on profit, Frank focused on people. He wasn't just looking for rare signs, vintage toys, or classic motorcycles. He wanted to know the stories behind them. As the cameras rolled and the world fell in love with American Pickers, tensions were building behind the scenes, and soon the very thing that made them famous would start tearing them apart. Despite the fact that millions watched the show, something else was going on that the audience was unaware of. He was one half of a duo that America fell in love with. He made people laugh, made them care about the past, and made them worry about the future. However, fame also comes with a price, one that Fritz never saw coming for years. At first, the changes were minor. A missed episode here, a silent absence there, but eventually the truth came to light. Frank wasn't simply taking a break. His health was failing him. They thought that hidden treasures were just waiting to be discovered. But behind the scenes, the cracks were already forming, and they would soon tear everything apart. Long hours on the road and years of traveling with heavy antiques had taken their toll. His back, which was strong enough to move vintage motorcycles out of abandoned barns, was now breaking, necessitating significant surgery. 185 stitches and 2 metal rods fused into his spine was the type of surgery that would have disabled anyone, but Frank was desperate to get better so he could resume his favorite activities. However, when he looked around, he noticed that something had changed and the performance was going on without him. Fans had questions, and the network's silence only made matters worse. Rumors began to circulate about if he was being replaced, if this was merely a hiatus, or if there was more going on. As time went on, it became increasingly evident that Frank's absence was permanent, and in 2021, the final blow arrived. It was announced by Mike Wolfe. In a startling interview, Frank called Mike out and didn't hold back, stating that they weren't the friends people believed they were during his entire recovery. The words were carefully chosen to be polite, even though Mike said he would miss him and that he wished him the best. Frank wasn't buying it, and he made sure everyone knew it. After years of working together, laughing together, and creating an empire together, Mike had never even bothered to call. We had never been that close. Frank acknowledged that the truth was painful for both him and the fans who had supported their friendship. But that was only the beginning, because losing American Pickers meant losing a part of himself. For him, picking wasn't a job. It was who he was, and without it, his world began to fall apart. Frank's hardships were far from finished, and his fame, wealth, and friendships were all evaporating. Fans adored Fritz because he was always smiling, could transform a dusty barn into a treasure trove, and could make even the most boring pick feel exciting. However, what they were unable to see was the battle he was fighting behind the scenes. As for years, Frank was being torn apart from the inside out by an invisible enemy that was relentless and left him in excruciating pain, depleted his vitality, and threatened to rob him of everything he valued. His digestive tract was attacked by Crohn's disease, a persistent condition that caused excruciating discomfort, nausea, and abrupt loss of weight. No matter how much success he had, Crohn's disease would always remind him that it was there, waiting to strike. On some days it was tolerable, but on other days it was incapacitating. Behind closed doors, his body was failing him, and Crohn's disease wasn't the only battle he was facing. Fame wasn't easy. It came with pressure, expectations, and waiting. The cameras never captured the bad days, the times he could hardly stand the pain, or the times he had to push through exhaustion knowing that millions of people were watching expecting the same old Frank, the funny, laid-back picker who never let anything slow him down. It grew heavier with each season. He began drinking not for enjoyment but as a means of escape. First, it was only a means of reducing stress, but in 2017, it evolved into something more sinister and hazardous. Everything came crashing down. Frank was pulled over for driving the wrong way on an Iowa interstate. The police report told the real story: alcohol in his system, prescription drugs, a DUI charge that would follow him for years. Suddenly the beloved picker wasn't just a TV personality, he was a headline, a cautionary tale. And it wasn't the last time his struggles would make the news while the world was watching his downfall. On the road, his personal life was falling apart. Behind the scenes, his engagement to longtime girlfriend Diane Bankson ended in disaster, a bitter public breakup, accusations of cheating, a lawsuit that made it clear whatever they once had was long gone. And Frank, he didn't just lose a relationship, he lost control. His drinking spiraled, his health worsened, and soon even he knew if he didn't do something he wouldn't survive, so he checked himself in. 77 days in rehab, a chance to start over, to rebuild, and for the first time in years it seemed like things might finally be turning around. He was sober, he was working on his health, he was ready to fight back, but fate had other plans, because just as Frank was pulling himself out of the darkness, tragedy struck, a battle he would never fully recover from, and this time there was no escaping it. One moment Fritz was on the road to recovery, the next his entire world collapsed. For years, he had fought battles that no one truly understood: his health, his addiction, his career. Each one had taken something from him, but through it all he had always managed to pick himself back up. He had always found a way to keep moving forward until the day his body betrayed him completely. Just July 2022, Frank suffered a massive stroke, one so severe that it left him unable to care for himself. The man who had spent a lifetime traveling across the country negotiating deals and restoring history was now trapped inside his own failing body. His speech was slurred, his movements were weak. The independence he had always prided himself on was gone, and the world around him moved on. A court was forced to step in. Frank could no longer handle his affairs, so a guardian was assigned to supervise his medical treatment. His estate, which had once been a meticulously curated collection of treasures, was now just another legal case, and the true cost of his stroke was not only what he lost but also what it cost to keep him alive. $29,000 a month for medical care. His finances and entire life, every decision, and every choice were now in the hands of someone else. For the first time in years, after years of silence, after all the accusations and bitterness, Mike Wolfe finally reached out to him. The two men spoke not as co-stars or business partners, but as old friends, and all the anger and resentment no longer mattered. Mike visited him during his recovery, checking in and rekindling a friendship that had once seemed beyond repair for Frank. It was a reunion that should have happened years ago, but it was too late because his health was still declining. After years of disease and hardship, his body was already weakening and disintegrating more quickly than anybody had anticipated. Then, in September 2024, the day that would mark the end of Frank's narrative arrived. When the end finally arrived, all of that vanished because in his last moments, nothing else mattered. Not the fame, the show, or the betrayals. Just the people who were there holding his hand as he took his last breath. Frank Fritz had spent his life chasing history, but in the end, history would remember him. He had lived in the shadow of his health, career, friendships, and struggles for years. The man who once called Frank his brother was by Mike Wolfe's side after years of feuds, silence, and resentment. They had built an empire together, but in the end, nothing remained to fight over because whatever had kept them apart had been washed away by time. In those last moments, they were just two old friends, not co-stars or rivals in business, and Frank passed away from complications from his stroke. Frank's body, which had been weakening from years of illness, had finally given out, but his legacy was a different story. After his death, the doors to his private garage were finally opened, and what they discovered inside left even the most experienced collectors in awe. There were hundreds of vintage motorcycles, some worth thousands of dollars, rare models that collectors had been searching for years, and priceless relics that were so unique that they belonged in museums. Some of them were still shining perfectly, while others sat untouched, covered in layers of dust. waiting for an owner who would never return. It was more than just a garage. It was a museum of Frank's passion and life's work, filled with historic memorabilia and pieces of Americana that told the story of a man who had spent his life looking for lost treasures. However, the biggest shock wasn't what they found. Rather, it was what was going to happen to Frank's estate, because it wasn't just being cataloged and preserved. It was being sold, and the world would soon learn why, because what happened next was unexpected. Frank Fritz spent his life chasing history, finding value in the forgotten, restoring what others had discarded, but in the end his greatest act of preservation wasn't about antiques, it was about something much bigger. For weeks after his passing, speculations surrounded his estate. Collectors lined up, fans mourned. His massive collection of vintage motorcycles, antique signs, and rare Americana was set to be auctioned off. People assumed the money would go to a private fund, a hidden beneficiary, or perhaps even dissolve into legal disputes, but then came the revelation: every single penny from the auction, millions of dollars, would be donated to charity. The news sent shock waves through the collector's world. Why would a man who spent his entire life acquiring, restoring, and cherishing these treasures give them all away? Why would he let go of everything he had built? Because Frank understood something that few ever do: legacy isn't about what you keep, it's about what you leave behind. The reaction was instant. Tucker Carlson himself stunned the world by saying, "This man spent his entire life building something, and now it's spreading across the world piece by piece. It's like a final chapter that he never got to write himself." But maybe that was the point, because Frank's true passion wasn't just collecting things. He also collected history, meaning, and lives. In one final act, he made sure that his own story would be about more than just what he found. It would be about what he gave back. As a result, the motorcycles he treasured, the antiques he battled for, and the signs and memorabilia that once defined him became more than just what he had. They became hope, support, and a legacy that stretched. Frank Fritz's greatest treasure was ultimately found in what he left behind, not in what he found. Thank you for watching, and please remember to like and subscribe. We hope to see you in the future video.